That's
It's like
awesome. You said it was in Lima, Peru, or what part of Peru?
Tarapoto, Peru. So we
Gotcha.
we flew into Lima, and then it's like an hour or so flight from there.
Right.
And it's, it's pretty deep into the Amazon rainforest there.
No way. So
So
you
you're
kind
in,
of go away from the Andes, getting out of the mountains, go down towards like the Amazon. You're in the jungle now.
yeah, yeah, like you're in legit jungle, which is like the perfect place to to
Right.
experience all of that.
Were you a little intimidated by not just like obviously the ayahuasca experience, like, like, but also just like, hold on, what am I getting myself into? Like, what was that like? Kind of the logistics of everything. And did you have any sort of like second thoughts as you were getting closer to the moment of truth?
They say like a lot can start happening in your life before you even show up to a
Oh,
medicine like
really?
that. A lot of transformation and things. And I didn't have anything real crazy happen. But I definitely had some anticipation going to. I was mostly excited. I was really looking forward to the experience, especially after um, so many years of struggling in the conventional mental health system, and
Mm-hmm.
getting this opportunity to have, this incredible spiritual slash nervous system, mind, body, soul healing experience in the heart of the jungle with the Shipibo shaman, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. So I was really excited for it for the most part. There was other people in the group that I think were maybe a little more apprehensive and like, what am
Oh,
I
yeah.
getting myself into? And yeah, it was crazy intense, but um, I
That's
really
wild.
tried to I really
And the
tried to just
people
take
that
it.
were feeling that apprehension, did they still kind of go through with it, or was there people encouraging them, or was it sort of just like, well, yeah, what was
Yeah,
that?
everyone went through with it. I
Yeah.
think the people that showed up that were in more of a state of fear and panic with it, and not that easy, like accepting of what was going to happen,
Yeah.
I think they had a more difficult time with it.
Right.
Whereas if you can go into that experience just being open as much as possible, even when things get terrifying, which they likely will at some point, you just got to let go into it, and that seems to be about the best way to get through. It's like when you try to resist the
Right.
experience, or like, oh, I shouldn't be here, why did I sign up, why did I take this, and then like that panic just feeds it, and now you're going to go for a rough ride.
Yeah, yeah, no, dude, that's so wild. I want to ask you some more questions about this, but let me introduce you first. So,
Sure, sure.
I'm Jordan Ryan, and welcome to the Mind Body Mushroom, the podcast where we explore the magic of mushrooms, adaptogens, and all the ways you can naturally upgrade your health and well being. Today's guest is a true testament to resilience and the human spirit. Lieutenant Kegan Smurf Gill, U.S. Navy, is a former Navy F-18 Super Hornet pilot that survived the fastest ejection in naval aviation history, a harrowing 695-mile-per-hour ordeal that left him with life-altering injuries. Despite enduring multiple surgeries, PTSD, and a traumatic brain injury, Keegan embarked on an extraordinary journey of recovery, embracing holistic and psychedelic-assisted therapies to achieve profound healing. Transitioning from a decorated military career to becoming an ultra endurance athlete, motivational speaker, and author, Keegan now dedicates his life to advocating for veteran health and resilience. His forthcoming memoir, Phoenix Revival: The Aftermath of Naval Aviation's Fastest Ejection, set for release on January 21st, 2025. Dude, that's coming up.
Yeah, yeah, we're
Delves
like
into
2 weeks
the.
out.
I'm stoked, man. I have so much to ask you about there. But his memoir delves into the remarkable journey from the cockpit to recovery, offering inspiration to all facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. We're honored to have Keegan here today, share his insights, his story of perseverance, and his mission to inspire others. Keegan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I
Thanks
said,
for having me.
I learned a little bit about you just kind of from like your bio and coming online, and I'm like, hold on, dude, like I'm in the presence of a legend right here.
I don't know
So
about that, but it's a crazy story, and there's not many like it.
yeah, dude, I would love to hear, but let's before we hop into the accident, let's rewind a little bit and just kind of start maybe with your, decision to join the Navy or, coming in as a lieutenant. I'm guessing you had some college before.
Yeah, so I was probably, I wasn't the most likely person to go into the military. I
Mm.
kind of came from a very almost like hippie kind of background with my parents. They were,
Seem very chill.
uh, they, they, they were not I wasn't allowed to have GI Joes. I couldn't play Mortal
Mhm.
Kombat. Like, I had an uncle who was a Marine, and my grandfather served in World War II. But other than that, there was no like close family that was involved with the military. And but I had a really incredible professor in college that was a Navy Huey gunship pilot back in the Vietnam era. He helped start the Sea Wolves, which were like the
Yeah.
first, you know, crazy special forces helicopter unit that would go into any condition. Basically, their contract was if we drop you off, we're going to pick you up no matter what.
Wow.
And he just had wild stories of his military career. And then I ended up becoming a flight instructor while I was in college. And when I completed my 4 year
Mhm.
degree, I spent a year flying as a corporate pilot. And while the pay was really good and I was grateful to have that job, I found myself wanting something more. Um, and I had a friend who was applying to go to Navy OCS, and I was like, "What's this OCS stuff?" I thought you had to have your dad be an admiral, and you had to go to the Naval Academy, and like I didn't understand like there was another option for some community college kid that was a freaking hippie to go into the military. But he kind of pointed me in the right direction, and I ended up going in through OCS and got accepted, and um, yeah, before I
And
knew it, I was a
were you looking to fly? That's what you were coming in for sure.
Yeah, I applied specifically for a pilot slot, nothing else. And that didn't mean
Hmm.
I was going to get to be a pilot. I still
Yeah,
had to
no shit.
go through all the training and I didn't know what I was going to fly. But if I could pass the training and the medical stuff and all of that, I was going to get an opportunity to go to flight school after completing OCS.
Oh, and so you have to commit to being a pilot before you even know what type of aircraft you're going to be piloting.
Yeah, so when you do an OCS application, I think you can select up to three different pipelines.
Uh-huh.
I only put pilot and nothing else. I was like, I
Just
either want to
whatever.
be in as a pilot or I don't want to be in at all. And
Yeah.
they accepted it. And with my flight background, I think that didn't hurt.
I'm
But
sure.
yeah, I still had to go through all the regular training. I had to go through the ground school, the survival training,
Uh-huh.
primary flight training, intermediate, and the whole way through you're competing with your grades and at a certain point it becomes a very big character interview as well. You
Hmm.
get sat down in a boardroom full of all these different naval aviators and they talk about why do you want to select that aircraft? Why do you want to
Hmm.
fly that? What do you think it's going to be like? And I think the character part of it's almost just as important as your ability as a pilot. I saw guys
Totally.
in training that were better academics, they were better in the aircraft, but because their personality wasn't quite the right fit, they ended up
Hmm.
not getting to select into the strike fighter community. But um, yeah,
Now, is the fighter community I would imagine it would be fairly coveted spots. If you want to be a pilot,
yeah.
I imagine most people want to be a fighter pilot. Is that pretty common? Like,
Yeah, I mean it's certainly um, it's the most difficult to achieve.
hmm.
You really got to continue to score consistently well. You got to continue to be in the upper half of your grades. You don't get that because you were at the bottom of the class.
Right, right.
Um, and even just to select the tailhook pipeline, you had to be in the top half of the class or
Oh
better.
wow.
And even if you're like the rock star of the class, you can still have a class go through, and the Navy doesn't have a need for any fighter guys, and so you won't get what you want at all. But
Wow.
they typically whoever's the top in the class typically gets their first pick. But
Choice.
it's always needs of the Navy over everything else.
Totally, totally.
So
Now, regarding that character component, what about so you have two people, equal academics, equal everything. The Navy needs two slots. One guy gets picked for character, the other guy gets overlooked for character. What's going on in that character piece? What's different?
I think a big thing is just being somebody who can operate on a team
Hmm.
that cares about the guys that he's going to be serving with. Someone who's not just an arrogant asshole,
No,
that
no Iceman is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like they want to try to trim out the arrogance as much as possible, and it's an incredibly humbling career, and it tends to humble everybody.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
they try to get rid of the people that are going to be some sort of egomaniac, the people who are going to like Blue Falcon their buddies, and like
Yeah.
I know there was one guy that went to selection, and I'm sure he still is kicking himself for doing this. But when they asked him why they should pick him, he's like, he just started like picking out everybody else's why they were less than him,
Oh
and he's like,
shit,
this
no
guy
way.
doesn't study, this guy cheats, like, and he just went through like his whole class and just like tore everybody up, and they're like, wow, man,
Got
you're
it. Well, you told us volumes about yourself, so thank you.
but yeah, there's so many different components and factors, and it's not ever. I don't know that there's like a secret sauce recipe. Even there's just
Sure.
it's very much it's decided at the in that moment with that individual, with a group of aviators who are experienced that get to make that call.
So now you make it to F-18. You're a fighter pilot now. This is more of a general question because I want to go
Hmm.
back to your career. But is how do people kind of chart off from there? Because there's like Top Gun school, there's Blue Angels, there's a few different like
Sure.
billets I suppose you could get.
Yeah. So you once you wing, uh, before you get to even touch an F-18, you've gone through. It takes usually at least a couple years, if not 2.5 to 3 years, to go through primary, well, in aviation pre-flight indoctrination, water survival, primary flight training in a prop plane, and then you go to advanced intermediate first in a T-45 Charlie
Those
Goshawk.
orange and white ones that
Yeah,
they I've
yeah,
seen some, I've seen those before. Yeah, over at like North Island.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Uh, we call them clown jets, and
You
that's
got the orange nose. Is that the? Yeah, that's funny.
but you go through that pipeline, and then you go through that whole character process that I discussed, and they
Mm-hmm.
look at your grades and everything, and then you select advanced, and that all takes about 2 to 2.5 years typically. And then you become a winged aviator, so you get your warfare insignia, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm a big kid now.
Uh-huh.
But then you show up to the F-18 RAG, or now they're
Yeah.
called the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, to go
Huh.
through the F-18 training, and then you spend the next year just getting kicked in the nuts again,
Yeah. You're an FNG.
and then you get through that, and you're like, all right, I kind of got to have a handle on this. And you show up to your first fleet squadron. And now it's been probably at least 3 years. And you got all this training. You got your wings. You've been flying F-18s now for the past year. And you show up and you realize, I still don't know anything. And then you're the FNG again at the squadron.
uh,
And, but the whole way through, once you do get to a fleet squadron, you go through all these different syllabi to progress. You become a combat certified wingman, then you become a section lead, so you can lead another aircraft into combat. Then you become a
mm,
division lead, where you can lead a whole flight of four into combat.
mm,
Um, and typically, that's as far as guys get in their first sea tour.
mm-hmm.
And depending on how you perform, not only in the cockpit, but also in your ground duties, because people may think once you're a pilot, like all you get to focus on is flying, but you have like an 8 hour to 12 hour ground job every day, where you're working in the scheduling office, you're running part of the
Shit.
maintenance department. There's all these ground jobs that you have to,
Right.
deal with as well. And if you perform really well, that's when you're more likely to select something like Top Gun or test pilot school. But that's something that split
Yeah.
comes after you've done an entire sea tour.
At a sea
And,
tour with the squadron, and being with the squadron would be like being at like VF-48 or something like that. Is that how it works? Is that what a squadron is?
yeah, yeah. So it's in the strike fighter community with the F-18s. It's VFA squadron.
Yeah,
So I
squad.
think there's about 15 or so out on the East Coast at NAS Oceana. Another 15 or 20 so squadrons out at NAS Lemoore, and then there's also several squadrons in Japan. Uh,
Huh.
but you can be at any of those locations. Go through your fleet tour, your sea tour, which is I think 3 years. You're in that squadron, flying. Likely deploying wherever the conflict is at that time, and then at the end of that, your skipper and your leadership of your squadron gets to put in for you where you go, and your
Interesting.
interest is part of that. But
Yeah, right.
um,
It's all news of the Navy and shit like that.
yeah, yeah,
Now, is the squadron itself attached to like a carrier group, or is it at the base, like NAS or something
yeah.
like that?
So being a Navy fighter squadrons, you are attached to carrier air groups, and depending on where they are in their deployment cycle when you join,
Uh-huh.
you may be, if it's during maintenance phase, you'll be
Right.
primarily operating out of one of the naval air stations, either Oceana, Lemoore, or potentially out in Japan. And so you'll be land based while the aircraft carrier's undergoing all its refurbishment. then once the aircraft carrier is ready to go, then you start doing detachments to prepare for deployment. So you'll get into a cycle where you're going out and you're doing carrier qualifications. Then you're going and doing all these air to air and air to ground training events. And then your air wing comes together, and then you all jump on the aircraft carrier and you go out and you
Hmm.
start doing more tactical stuff with it. And before you know it, you spend a couple years and you're spooled up, and then you deploy, and then for 6 to 10 months you're out on that aircraft carrier just nonstop, go go
Right.
go, and doing the real thing.
That's
And then
nuts.
and that cycle continues, and it's you know
Yeah, then there's
rinse
your
repeat.
time off. You go on leave for a little bit. You'll do a little individual like qualification, something like this, and then kind of get into that unit workup. And is that kind of the cycle a little bit?
Yep, yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And Coronado, do they not? What's going on with that air station? Because I noticed you said Lemoore and Oceana.
yeah,
Um, they don't
yeah.
fly
So
F-18s there. Is that the deal?
so Miramar used to be the
Mhm.
Navy base in San Diego, but I don't know if like the Navy like lost a bet or something with the
Uh,
Marines, but the Marines got to have Miramar as their base, and then they moved the Navy to Lemoore, which is in the Central Valley of California, which is
yeah. So
a
someone
long
lost a
ways
bet.
from San Diego.
Someone lost a
There's
bet.
still, I mean, there's beautiful stuff. Like you're not far from Yosemite and Sequoia and
Oh,
Big
that's cool.
Sur, but
That's cool.
where it's at itself is pretty barren, you
Yeah,
know.
pretty remote. Now, before we get into, I just have so many questions about aviation. So a little bit of my background. I was a recon medic. So,
Oh, very
I
cool.
joined. I went to Buds. Did that whole workup, washed out, went to a ship, and then fought for billets to become a medic, and went screens with Marsoc, got selected, went through recon, and then through in my pipeline in between schools, I blew out my back, and that kind of like sidelined my career in kind of the Marsoc community. But um yeah, so the aviation side of things, like I'm very familiar with like the Navy special warfare, Marine Corps special
Oh
warfare,
yeah.
and then like the fleet stuff. But aviation is like such a it's a new thing for me, so I this is all like really interesting. And stuff like automated what's it called, autonomous flying, the 6th gen fighter jets, drone swarms, like all the UFOs. There's so much happening in the aviation space right now, that it really is, it's super relevant and just like interesting for me as somebody who follows geopolitics and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Um, so regarding autonomous flying, like how is the aviator community sort of approaching that inevitability on some level?
You know, I think there's always going to be a place to have a human in a cockpit, especially with the jamming capabilities of
Hmm.
some of our very formidable adversaries. You know, you can have these remote drones, but it's all through data link, and if
Hmm.
that data link gets severed, now you just have a thing that's just going to crash into the ground. And I
Interesting.
bet one of the first things that's going to go down if we go into a war with, one of these formidable adversaries, be it China or whatever, they're going to hit a button and all those drones are just going to fall out of the sky.
Totally.
Whereas if you have something like a Super Hornet that has its self-contained navigation and a pilot,
Uh,
um, you potentially have something that's still going to be able to be in the air. So I think there's always going to be a place for having humans in the cockpit. And
right.
as warfare evolves, it rarely do we like just get rid of all the old technology and say we don't
Yeah.
need that anymore. I mean, if you just look at, you guys
Great.
still carry a knife. You still
Yeah.
carry,
Yeah.
like just because
Right.
we've developed better weapon systems, you still got to learn how to do hand-to-hand combat if you're an infantry soldier or marine.
Totally.
Like I
Totally.
don't think the man in the cockpit thing is going to go away.
Right.
Maybe there will be more and more of a unmanned presence. And already in the past 20 years of the global war on terror, there's a ton of drone
Mm.
uh, engagements, but there's still, I think, going to be a place. And what I see happening with things like the F-35 is now they're taking all these systems and software that's drastically improved, and it's allowing the pilot to have
Mm.
more free brain waves to do other things in higher level thinking, and it's integrating with
Interesting.
artificial intelligence in those cockpits. So it's basically it's using technology to enhance the human aspect of it, and then it's giving them better technology, and it's making an even more lethal platform in
That's
many
super
levels.
interesting. Yeah, that was kind of my next follow-on question was like these Gen 5 and 6th gen aircraft that I mean, I don't even know really much about 6th gen, but let's say 5th gen. 'Cause that's like the F-35, right? Would that be
Yep.
is
Yeah,
that
the
so
F-35 is fifth gen.
still a pilot, but obviously a lot more tech. Do you think that these systems that implement more of this technology, are more susceptible than like an F-18 to electronic warfare, for example? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I really I don't know the
Yeah.
particulars of those aircraft. I never flew the
Sure.
F-35, and I'm sure even if I did, I wouldn't be able to talk about any of
Yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff.
right.
They keep
Go
those
on, tell me.
yeah, they keep a lot of that stuff under wraps.
I'm sure. Now, did you go into test pilot? Is that kind of, tell
No,
me, I
no,
want to hear
no.
about your injury now, but you can
Yeah,
walk me through like maybe what your career part that got you to this place, but
sure.
let's move on to there.
Yeah, yeah. So I had gone through all my flight training. I had become a wing naval aviator. I had completed a year of training at the RAG, learning how to fly the F-18 and operate it at some basic tactics. And then I joined my first fleet squadron, VFA 143, the Pukin Dogs, out of NAS Oceana. We were part of KEG 7, attached to the Eisenhower, was our
Uh-huh.
aircraft carrier. And I joined the squadron. I became the fucking new guy, which in the Pukin Dogs you get called poop because you're the most worthless part of the dog, and you start back at the bottom of the totem pole again. But I played the smallmouth big ears card very well. I didn't really stick out, and I'd been in my squadron for almost a year. There was maybe 4 or 5 newer guys in the squadron at that point, and a lot of them had call signs, and I still hadn't earned a call sign.
Hmm.
And on January 15th, 2014, I walk into the ready room just like a normal day at work. And I look up on one whiteboard and there's, all these other guys got like a laundry list of call signs written up on the whiteboard under their name. And I've got like 2 or 3 that are just like, they're not going to stick because they're so dumb.
Uh-huh.
And one of the more senior pilots in the squadron even comes up to me and goes, "Man, you just haven't done anything dumb enough yet to earn a call sign." And I walk over to the SDO desk, the squadron duty desk, and my buddy Fisty's on duty. And to keep things light in the squadron, he had put up the airspace we were all going to be flying in that day out over the Atlantic in the Whiskey 72 airspace. And he used the Shark Tracker app on his phone to tag all these positions of GPS tagged sharks. And it just so happened on this day there was a 16-foot, 3,500-pound great white shark named Mary Lee right underneath my airspace. And so
No.
Fissy's like, "Hey man, today would be a terrible day to eject. It's 37 degree Fahrenheit at the nearby buoy, so near
Oh my
freezing water
freezing.
temperatures, uh, below freezing air temps, wind, churned up oceans, and there's a great white shark under you." And
Just waiting.
we're like laughing about this. And then about an hour after that conversation, I was out doing air combat maneuvering, so dogfighting the jet, or we just call it BFM, basic fighter maneuvering. Though, like buds, there's nothing terribly basic about it. It's incredibly
Right.
complex and difficult, which I think the Navy has a thing where if it's something that's really challenging, they put basic in front of
Yeah.
it.
Right. Just to add insult to injury.
Yeah. Um,
100%.
but we went out, we did a little air-to-air refueling to start, and just to check one of these pods that had just come out of maintenance. And then my flight lead and I broke away from the tanker jet, and we set up and did several rounds of fighting. And this is probably the epitome of what people think when they think fighter
Right.
pilot. You're performing the aircraft at high
Right.
G. You're maneuvering really aggressively. You're operating your weapon systems, defensive systems. You're an
Hmm.
afterburner. You're just ripping around. It's like playing four-dimensional chess while multitasking on 4 radios and doing all this stuff while in the middle of a hit workout.
Wow.
Like
Right.
your body at times is weighing like 1,600 pounds, just
Oh
your head
my
and your
God.
helmet and under that kind of G is like having a 150-pound person hanging out in your head while you're looking around trying to keep sight of the other aircraft. Like,
Wow.
there's a lot going on physically and mentally in those fights, but it was my absolute most favorite thing to do in the jet. But
The
it's
stuff you
also
signed up for. It's
incredibly
like,
difficult. Yeah,
yeah.
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 But we got to Joker fuel on this flight, meaning we had just enough fuel. We reset our bingo bugs down to bingo. before we would have to head straight back to Oceania, and we set up for one last fight. We set up down at 12,500 feet at 450 knots, which is a little bit on the lower side of our typical fights and quite a bit faster than we typically would set up for a fight. But we were kind of pressed on time. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were just like, let's do it, make it happen. The flight lead called fights on. We pitched in at each other. And as I came to that merge, as we crossed paths like a couple medieval dragon mounted knights heading at the speed of sound, we blast by each other. I was already partially nose low and partially inverted, so I continued to roll the aircraft inverted and pull the aircraft in a dive towards the ocean called the
Uh-huh.
split S maneuver. Now, this would have normally been all right, and normally an F-18 can do that vertical maneuver in about 5,000 feet or less of airspace. So I was up at 10,500 feet when I started that maneuver, which gave me a 500-foot bubble between me and the hard deck. We set at 5,000 feet for training to
Mm-hmm.
give us a little wiggle room in case something happens.
Mm-hmm.
I pull the jet hard, and this thing starts to perform. I feel my body, weighing 1,600 pounds. Just my head and helmet are like, 150-ish pounds, and you can feel all that. And I'm
Yeah.
looking up to keep sight of the flight lead. I'm straining my neck, and I feel all that force. The stick is in my lap. This thing is carving through the sky, just ripping G's. And then all of a sudden, I just felt the jet ease up and just stop turning. And it was like going around a sharp corner in a sports car and having the steering wheel kick back halfway. Only
Mm-hmm.
instead of skidding off the road, now I'm just stuck in a dive at the ocean.
Down. Oh,
And
shit.
I very quickly hear the radar altimeter going off, letting me know I've just gone through the hard deck at
Yeah.
5,000 feet. I instinctively just pulled the throttle to idle, put out the speed brake in this desperate attempt to slow the aircraft, but it was just not enough. And the aircraft, despite the stick being commanded into my lap, telling it pull as hard as it would, it wasn't turning. And the ocean just rushed up at me. And I remember 2 seconds from impact, I could see the ripples of the white caps, like the ocean was in my face. And there was no way I was going to get this jet out of the dive. Instinctively, I just reached between my hands and pulled the handle. A normal ejection is incredibly violent. It will cause spinal compressions that are permanent. It'll cause flail injuries. Even if you're straight and level below 180 knots, for guys that jump out of airplanes, 180 knots is still pretty freaking fast to come out of an aircraft, and it's like a very explosive force when you jump into that airstream. But I was well above that. When I ejected, I was at 51 degrees nose low, 2 seconds from impact at 2,000 feet above the ocean, traveling at 604 knots indicated airspeed, which is 695 miles per hour, or 0.95 indicated Mach at that altitude. So what we call the transonic region, at the sound barrier, just before
Mhm.
breaking the speed of sound. And
Oh my God. And
as
so
I came out into that,
2,000 feet above the water is 2 seconds away from impact.
at that dive angle and
That's
airspeed, yeah,
crazy,
I
dude.
was just seconds from just vaporizing along with the aircraft. But I pulled that handle. That ignited a rocket motor under my ass. The instantaneous G force of that explosion going off is 50 Gs. So, that
And
just
you're pulling what,
compresses your spine.
16 maybe before? Like, is that what, when you're in like the peak of that turn, like when
Uh,
you said you feel like 1,600 pounds on you, maybe that's what you said. Well, how many
about
G's is
about
that?
a 7.5 G pull is where
Yeah.
we're typically are fighting, and that had eased down to maybe 4 or 5 Gs
Oh my
when that
God.
when that aircraft system overrode my control input and put us in the dive situation to begin with. But that
And you
50
get
Gs,
ejected at 50. Oh my
yeah,
God.
in less than a half a second, 0.4 seconds, the ejection sequence launches you out of that cockpit. So the canopy blows clear, blasts you out of the cockpit to get you out as fast as possible. And then you go to about a 12 to 14 G sustained rocket boost as you fly out of the aircraft.
Like
And
on your seat,
yeah,
basically.
so there was that incredible impact to my body and my brain.
Yeah.
And then I impacted that airflow, impacting the sound barrier with my body. And the human body is not terribly aerodynamic at that kind of airspeed. It was 100 times the force of a Category 1 hurricane that instantaneously impacted my body. This explosive force, it blew off my helmet, traumatic brain injury, bashed my face. It looked like I had gotten my ass kicked after 15 rounds in boxing. I broke my neck, my left shoulder, bilateral humerus fractures. My right humerus and my arm tore through the right brachial artery.
Oh
My
my God.
radius and ulna shattered, severing the median nerve that controls my hand. My brachial plexus, the nerve that kind of controls the upper body, was smashed and damaged. It is so fast that the dry suit I was wearing shredded open. The gear on my vest all ripped off. My radio, my signaling equipment, my feet were flailing so violently with steel toe boots on that they became like medieval maces and smashed open my tib fibs and both my lower leg bones with open fractures. Chunks of my bone were coming out. And this is all just in like a split second, just blown apart,
Are you even
destroyed.
feeling anything yet? Like, do you even have a physical sensation in your body or is this just like you're still in like your nerve endings can't even compute what's happening this fast?
So I remember vividly up to reaching to pull the handle, but after that point, I don't have a linear memory. Everything's been able to be recreated through the investigation, the people that were on scene overhead and down in the water, as well as over the course of the years, I've gotten, well, for years I was dealing with night terrors, so I would get flashbacks of being in the ocean. I don't remember impacting. I'm pretty sure I was unconscious, just from that force of the ejection impacting the sound barrier, knocked me out. But very quickly, once I was in the water, I was coming back to consciousness.
Oh wow.
The
And
parachute
how
that had,
long before they were on site? Someone to get you. They send. I'm assuming they send people from the carrier group, right? You probably have like a small boat that comes out.
so 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 first my flight lead spotted my parachute opening,
Uh
and
huh.
he was able to start the on-scene commander. He spotted a fishing vessel about a mile away from his position, and so he tried to get them on maritime guard. When they wouldn't respond, he got down really low and really fast, and he thumped over their bow to get their attention. They got on maritime guard, and he was able to direct them over to my position. At this point, my helmet had ripped off, my beacon had malfunctioned. I had no signaling equipment nor the ability to use it. I had no radio. Um, I was just a little dark head that was now my parachute actually had failed to disconnect automatically as it should have,
Yeah.
and it was now dragging me under the surface of the ocean. And for
Right.
anybody who's ever been held under the water when you need a breath of air and you can't get it, you know how terrifying that feeling is, especially when you start to like guppy and just inhale water. And that's where I was at. I was
Right.
unable to swim, bleeding out,
Yeah, I'll say you have
drug
a
beneath the
brachial
surface.
artery arterial wound
And,
right
and
there.
now and now Jaws, I got images of Jaws coming back. Like this shark is just gonna come. It was like worst case scenario, and
This was the
almost,
day that they were saying that, hey, don't
yeah.
bad day to eject.
This is like an hour after that conversation with Fisty. But fortunately, that fishing vessel got close enough. They weren't actually able to really help, but they at least provided a visual
Yeah.
rough location of me, because had
Right.
they not shown up, I would have drifted out into the ocean and never be seen again. But there
Yeah.
was a Coast Guard vessel from Elizabeth City sent up. There was an H-60 Seahawk sent off of HS-11 from the nearby aircraft carrier, and there was also a helicopter from Norfolk coming inbound from HSC-28. The HS-11 actually showed up first. There was a miscommunication, and the rescue swimmer jumped in and swam past me onto the fishing vessel, thinking I had been pulled onto the fishing vessel. There's actually a whole HAZREP just in the rescue effort because there was so much chaos.
Oh wow.
Everybody was on different frequencies. There was
Right.
multiple helicopters, multiple boats. Like everybody wanted to save my ass, but it was chaotic. But
Dude, for
it was actually a blessing that that first helicopter didn't pick me up, because they had been instructed to bring me back to the aircraft carrier, not realizing the extent of my injuries.
Mm.
But fortunately, this other helicopter showed up from HSC 28. Their rescue swimmer, Cheech, jumped in the ocean. He cut me free of the paracord and got me back into the helicopter. I coded several times en route to Norfolk, Virginia, but by the time they picked me up, the reports vary between an hour and a half and 2 hours that I had been in the ocean, emerged in 37-degree Fahrenheit ocean water. So I was severely hypothermic. When they got me to the hospital, luckily they had just like the surgical dream team on that day of
Yeah.
all these trauma surgeons. They initially treated me for severe hypothermia. My core body temp was at 87 Fahrenheit. So I should have been dead from hypothermia, but they said the hypothermia actually constricted the blood flow so
Dude,
that
I
I
was
didn't
just
bleed
gonna
out.
ask you that. That was my literal next question. I was like, dude, I wonder if the 37-degree water actually kept you from bleeding out. just
It
by, and
did.
I'm sure adrenaline and some other stuff as well, just that constricting. But like, yeah,
Yeah.
for, I mean, that arterial bleed, you should have been gone a lot quicker than somebody getting to you.
Yeah, they're like, if your dry suit had actually functioned properly, you would have bled to
You
death
might be
warm and
dead.
toasty way before
Wow.
anybody got there. It
And
also
did
helped
the,
preserve the brain, they said.
oh, interesting. Now, did the SAR swimmer throw on a tourniquet, or how did they kind of identify
Um,
in that situation that you had a severe
I
hemorrhage?
don't, I don't have clear memory
Yeah.
of in the helicopter. They said I was in and out of consciousness. They were, resuscitating me over and over as I coded again and
Wow.
again. I don't know if they were able to get a tourniquet on in the helicopter or not,
Wow.
but they were able to keep me alive long enough to get me into that hospital.
That's
Um,
incredible. Yeah, it's one thing. I mean, you would think that with all of the technology and radars and eye in the sky, all sorts of stuff, that like finding somebody that falls overboard when you like somebody witnessed it happen, everyone's aware. It's not like you fell off in the middle of the night or something like that. But I mean, we would do man overboard drills and stuff like that, and you realize like it's a bunch of knuckleheads trying to find you most of the time, and B, it's literally like a needle in a haystack type of situation. Those currents
oh
go,
yeah,
and like the probabilistic it after a minute it could go to here, the search area spreads to here. It's exponential growth in terms of where you could be. So it would scare the shit out of me. Like I'm not afraid of the water. I'm a great swimmer, like, but just being, if you fall off one of these boats or you're out there at sea. I mean, dude, it happened to two seals I think last year. I don't know if you remember that. They were off the
no,
coast of Yemen, maybe. But there was a VBSS, like a visible search and seizure. They
yeah, yeah.
they go on rough seas at night. To they were boarding some Iranian like fishing vessel or something like that, and two guys fell off. Oh well, one guy falls off the ladder. His swim buddy kind of goes in after him. Gone, never found
Wow.
again. Yeah, and so these are great swimmers. You know what I mean? Like it happens that fast.
Yeah, the
So
ocean can
that's
swallow you up like you're nothing. Swallow you
yeah.
up in like nothing.
So
Um,
then what? What happens next? You kind of come back in. You're off in the hospital. They're taking care of you.
Yeah, they're treating me for severe hypothermia. They're treating me with blood transfusions for all the blood loss. I'm having rhabdo from my kidneys shutting down from the overwhelming amount of tissue that's in my blood now that it's just shutting my organs down. But they're able to get me semi-stable, and then very quickly they put me into an induced coma and rushed me into trauma surgeries. And I spent the next week undergoing over a dozen different trauma surgeries to salvage my extremities from amputation with fasciotomies. Um, they ended up putting titanium nails, intermedullary rods into my long bones of my arms and legs, a steel plate on my left forearm. So now I've got like a legit Wolverine skeleton, you know.
Sick.
Uh, um, after all that, a weekend, they transferred me to Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and my squadron mates, my family are all in the waiting room, just hearing if I'm going to be a vegetable. Am I going to wake up? And at this point, it doesn't look very good. It's miraculous that I'm still alive in any way.
Right.
And the same pilot who before the flight had said I hadn't done anything dumb enough to earn a call sign kind of piped up and was like, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be fine. And so the squadron took scrappy motherfucker and they shortened it down into Smurf,
I
the
love
sort of
that.
makeshift acronym. But because it's the military, you have to have a politically correct cover story. So they said I was a short guy who turned blue from
Yeah, that's what
hypothermia.
I was thinking. Oh, you're coding blue.
But at
Uh,
least I got a call sign out of all this,
yeah, I
hard
mean
earned.
that's silver lining, I suppose. Uh,
But in total, I spent about 2 weeks in that coma. And as I came to in the ICU, I was just completely out of it between the head injury and all the meds they had me on for pain management. I was just loopy as could be. But as I kind of came back, I remember the wool blanket that was laying over me. I thought was made out of lead or something because I couldn't move it, but it was because I was paralyzed. And eventually the medical staff came in and said, you've been in a high speed ejection. You'll likely never use your arms. You're not going to be able to walk again, and your military flying career is over. And I think they were just trying to be very realistic with me. But in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I'm going to prove you fuckers
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
And it just
Dude,
became my mission to do so.
it's so funny. I have theories about that because there are more stories that I know of people who have been told they will never blank again that then blank again,
Right.
than people. And so what I can't figure out though is it like is it some weird sort of like reverse psychology, like you
I
want
don't
to prove
know.
them wrong, and that's because I mean that's I can't figure it out. But on the other hand, I also think I'm like people defer to authority so much. Like they have so much, trust the experts. These are the doctors.
Hmm.
That when a doctor tells you that you're not going to do something again, and this is their professional
Right.
opinion, I would think that some not insignificant percentage of the population's like, oh, doc said it,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
and and I really don't think that they were doing it to do a reverse psychology trick. I really think they're just trying to be very direct with you, and
Right.
this is their medical statistics that they, based on your injuries, this is likelihood of what's going to happen. And I think
Right.
they're just trying to be very realistic with me to just try to explain the situation I was in. I don't think they were intentionally trying to get me to be like, well, fuck you guys, but
Yeah.
it worked for me. And I spent the next 3 months undergoing or living in an inpatient polytrauma center in Richmond, Virginia's VA. And, terrible food, shitty
Yeah.
sleep. They wake you up all night to give you pills so you can
Yeah.
sleep. So
Love
kind
that.
of the foundation of healing is non-existent, but the staff was incredible. You're getting access to a lot of these good therapies. I mean, I was doing speech therapy, vision
Mhm.
therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, kinesiotherapy, recreational therapy, aquatherapy, you name it, like
Yeah.
everything.
Right.
And over the course of 3 months, I regained enough function in my arms and legs that I could again wipe my own ass, which was a huge
Wow.
marker,
I'm sure you
and I
probably
could get
cried,
around on a
man.
walker.
You
Yeah,
probably fucking
not
cried.
not being able to take care of yourself is incredibly frustrating. But I got through that. I ended up doing more surgeries. I spent over 2 years, well, almost 2 years to the date of the accident. I had overcome prescription drug addiction to all the pain meds they had me on. I'd gained a stack of medical waivers. I was able to max out the Navy PRT again, and I returned to flying Super Hornets after all that.
Shut up, dude. No way. What, how long between your injury and you getting that's incredible. I didn't know that. I thought you were done in the Navy. I'm
No,
along for
no.
the ride. I have no
Uh,
idea what your story is. This
it
is
uh,
insane, dude.
it took almost exactly 2 years
That's
before
pretty
I
quick.
had classed back up to fly the F-18 again.
That is
Um,
quick.
and this is sort of like where the happy ending Disney version of my story would
Right.
be, but I'm here to tell you it ends up getting much more wild after that, even
No way.
as I start to experience the residual effects of brain injury that,
Sure.
that start to exacerbate and come out in different ways. And I had a flight down at Tyndall Air Force Base after I'd been back flying about a year and a half. I was back in a fleet squadron, like feeling like on top of the world. I actually had a call sign finally, like I'm going places in my military career,
You only had to almost die to get it. I mean,
and so I'm, back in that world. I went on this weapons exercise in Tyndall Air Force Base down in Florida. I got to live fire an AIM-9 Mike Sidewinder at a drone, and then break off and fight an F-22 Raptor that was from the Hawaiian Raptor Squadron. These guys fly Raptors, and they're stationed on Oahu.
oh wow,
So they
that's Air
probably have,
Force, right? That's
yeah,
is that kind of
yep.
is the F-22 like the F-8 like the Air Force's equivalent of the
It's
F-18, or is it like a different class of air?
No, that's the F-22 is a fifth generation fighter,
Oh, it
whereas
is.
the F-18
Yeah,
is a fourth gen. So
gotcha. Right.
it's a far more capable air to air
Yeah.
adversary, and if the F-18 ever had to fight one, they'd be dead before they even saw it on radar.
Oh shit, dude. Wow.
Because they're
Yeah.
they're super stealthy. They've got better weapon systems, better radars.
Yeah.
So it's a super sexy jet. It's got directional thrust. But I
Mm.
got to go out and me and some other young dude about my age, a couple O3s in the military with millions upon
Yes.
millions or
That's
hundreds of millions
sick.
of equipment were fighting each other. And I
That's
came
so
back from
fun,
the
dude.
flight and I had this surreal memory of getting to be in this dogfight with this thing that I had seen at air shows, as
Yeah.
a young guy, and been like, holy shit, I can't believe this is my job. But in the debrief, I was watching my tapes for the missile shoot, and I realized that I had these huge gaps in my memory, and I wasn't feeling very good. I was feeling kind of
Mm.
panicked for no apparent reason.
Mm.
Um, I went back. I tried to sleep it off. The next day, I was just on duty. It just felt terrible the whole day. Like simple things were really difficult for me to do. And
Mm.
I got back again that night, and I sat down on my bed in the hotel, and the room just spun around me. So I was getting vertigo. I was panicking. I was having panic attacks that I had never experienced before. I remember I was trying to set my alarm clock on my phone because I had to get up in the morning, and I couldn't figure out how to use the alarm clock on my phone. I couldn't do the math for what time I needed to get up, and I was like, something is seriously wrong.
And this was
And
like, it happened like over a day, kind of like a short period of time. You went from flying planes to not being able to set your alarm.
yeah, very quickly after that flight had progressed, and there had been a
Okay.
number of issues in the F-18 community where we had had this faulty system in the environmental control system causing rapid cabin pressure fluctuations. And so
Oh,
I know, as in the diving you've done, if you come up
sure.
quickly from depth,
Yeah.
you can get decompression sickness, which
Hmm.
is for people who aren't in. I know but it's basically the little nitrogen bubbles in your blood come out of solution, and it's like opening a soda can or a bottle, and you see all the bubbles come to the surface. That kind of can happen with your blood if you decompress too quickly. And so what's thought to have happened, which had happened to a number of other pilots and aircrew in the F-18 community already, to the point that they had started putting hyperbaric treatment
Hmm.
facilities on the aircraft carriers. So when
Hmm.
pilots came back with DCS, they could rush them in. There had been a
Wow.
number of people who had been, permanently put into a vegetative
Oh,
state because of these
God.
bubbles. If you
Yeah.
get into your joints, it's painful, you get the bends, but if you
Hmm.
get that in your brain, it can kill you. And it had killed other pilots. And so they're like, well, we think you've probably got DCS, considering your symptoms. So they rushed me to Mayport Dive Base. That was luckily just 20 minutes away. They put me into a hyperbaric treatment facility, and I spent the night hanging out with a Navy diver in
EMTs
there.
over there. Yeah.
And he was telling me all about like horror stories of those decompression systems malfunctioning.
Oh,
And
God.
they like open it, and it's just like
Oh,
pink
no.
goo dripping because they're every single air molecule in their body just rapidly expanded in a
Oh,
split second.
no, dude.
So that's what we were talking about while we are in there.
You're like, oh, yeah? Well, I'm glad it won't happen today, right? Right?
I think he knew I was a sick fuck. So,
Oh,
but
my God.
it helped a
So
little
they're going
bit.
to treat you that. So they're
Yeah,
treating you.
yeah, it helped. It helped a little bit, but the next day I came back in to see the dive doc, and he's like, "Hey, man, I looked at your medical record. Considering everything that you've been through, when you get
Yeah.
back to Lemoore, which is where I was stationed at that point, he's like, you should consider going in to see the flight surgeon. And in the military, like once you got an up shit with your medical and a high speed job, the last thing you want to do is to go in and say you've got something going on, especially something with your mental abilities.
Yeah.
Um, but I
Right.
had gotten to the point, and after consideration, I kind of reluctantly went in to see medical and
Yeah.
told them what was going on. And pretty quickly, I had a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis, and the treatments, despite there being, what ended up later becoming very evident was this huge issue with traumatic brain injury that I
Yeah,
was
right.
experiencing.
That's what I was
Um,
going to ask.
and
Sorry.
I think
Go ahead.
there's a tendency to, um, I think there's kind of a tendency to, we get these PTS or PTSD symptoms, as they call them, PTSD, I guess PTS now, but
Mm.
you get those symptoms, and I really think that's oftentimes because of this underlying brain issues. The
Totally.
physiology of your brain is not functioning properly. It's causing hormonal imbalances. It's causing all this chaos. And we see it as these symptoms that present themselves, and they put a PTSD label on it.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, mainstream medicine, typically the way they want to deal with that is through pharmaceuticals. And
Yeah.
I had this terrible experience of getting off all the pain meds they gave me. And I was like, I don't want to do meds again. But as time went on, they had me doing cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive
Hmm.
processing therapy, exposure therapy, all this sort of like sit down and let's talk about our feelings stuff. And it wasn't going anywhere.
Oh,
And it
wow.
makes sense that it wasn't, because the physiology of my brain was so
Yeah.
disrupted.
Right.
Maybe there's a point that stuff would be helpful, but
Sure.
it's not while your brain is still on fire.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, what that led to was, all right, well, we need to try these SSRIs. We need to try this antipsychotic called Seroquel at low dose to help you sleep, which it did knock me unconscious at night, but it wasn't restful sleep. I was suffering from just persistent insomnia. The panic stuff was getting worse. I was starting to slip into more paranoid thinking, hypervigilance, which,
Mm.
if you don't sleep for even a few days, you're going to start to experience stuff like that. And this had
Right.
started to turn into months of not getting restful sleep. And what they did is they just threw pills at it to mask those symptoms. But meanwhile, that underlying brain injury was just getting worse and worse to the point where, I thought I was being hunted by government assassins. My wife
Wow.
had just had our little boy. He's just a tiny little infant, and she's having to manage me in and out of psychoses along with our little baby. I would come into the room, she'd be cooking dinner, and I would run up and like dump everything in the garbage. I would like be like, "You can't eat that. You can't drink the water," because I thought everything was being poisoned. I'm like, somebody has to be poisoning me. Well, I was being poisoned, but it was in these
Right.
FDA
Well, it's the
approved,
government too.
yeah, it's government
Yeah.
poisoning with these FDA approved pills given to
You-
me by people in lab coats with doctorate degrees. And, but that continued, is the only
you-
remedy. It's not working because you need more of it. And I
right.
found myself
Right.
in this insane cycle and continuing to degrade. I was eventually medically retired. I moved back to northern Michigan with my family, and that treatment continued at the VA. No, man, you just got to take more of the Seroquel. You just got to do this medicine. And
There's, if I could hop in for a second,
yeah.
there is a history of this too within
Oh
the
yeah.
military. I mean, I'm sure it goes back way further than this, but where it really kind of the first time that this came on my radar was with Gulf War syndrome. So
Hmm.
Gulf War syndrome, for those who don't know, was after the Gulf War, which was like a very short war. I think it was only a couple months or something like that. And we basically come in during one of the, I think Bush Senior, we roll into Iraq and like kind of take I think I don't remember even all the details of the Gulf War, but it doesn't matter. It was a very short war, and we
Yeah.
won it in a couple months. And
Hmm.
guys start coming back from the Gulf War, and they're experiencing these crazy like PTSD, symptoms, and people are kind of like, "That's really strange. We don't really exactly know why, because yeah, maybe you went to combat, it was a thing, but it wasn't like it kind of defied what we understood. I mean, prior to that, you have like Vietnam, World War II, Korea. These were like shell shock. People were like
Sure.
truly messed up from that on a psychological basis, and I'm sure on a physiological basis, but
Oh yeah.
the psychological made sense. So anyway, Gulf War didn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, one of my best friends that I went to high school with, he went into medical research, and one of the labs in New Mexico at UNM that he was like interning for was they were. Um, Long story short, discovered that Gulf War syndrome was actually related to a gut bacteria. Guys were going over there, and they for whatever reason they weren't treating the water to get rid of some type of micro, you know organism, and it would infect their gut, and it was giving people PTSD symptoms from gut health. Fast forward to within the last 5 years, I don't remember exactly when this happened, but it comes up again, not Gulf War syndrome, but something similar related to TBI. So there was like the Will Smith movie, CTE, everyone talking about CTE. We started seeing that, like, hey, maybe all of these people who are like losing their mind and murdering their whole family for some unknown reason, maybe there's something going on with their brain, and that's why they're having these changes in behavior, and it's not just a psychological thing. So they find and they say, yeah, traumatic brain injury is causing all these stuff. Everyone starts looking at NFL. What can we do to change the safety of helmets? Blah blah blah. You know, but within the last 5 years or so, again, I don't remember exactly when this happened. There was this guy. He was in the army. He was an army reservist, stationed somewhere. I mean, he's an army reservist, so he's like a normal civilian, but he does like army stuff, a couple times a month. One his like station duty at like his little NOSC or whatever they're called was working the hand grenade range. So that's just what he do, just throw hand grenades and teach people
Just
how to throw hand
repetitive
grenades.
exposure to that over and
Yeah,
over.
Yeah. So this guy never deployed overseas. He never actually went to combat. The extent of his whatever was just being exposed to this low impact blast trauma from grenades. What we thought, based on these TBI models and concussive, blast patterns inside buildings, this should not have been causing him issues. He eventually goes and shoots up a bunch of people in like some like mass shooter type deal. They study his brain, CTE. And so it is remapping how, I mean, I don't know what advances they have made, but it was like a very important data point in that, like, maybe what we think about is what causes TBI and CTE is actually a lot less. And then how do we know maybe that translates to belt fed or like service weapons, like maybe the 50 cal has enough concussive
Sure
whatever
it
that it
does.
could be causing over enough period of time. So it's just really interesting to that we keep getting over and over again, and it taking for whatever fucking reason all these people in lab coats to be like, I don't know, did we try more SSRIs? Like, guys,
Dude,
it's
it's
maybe something
insanity.
else.
Conventional mental health treatment is insanity. It's doing the same thing, expecting different results, and it just doesn't work. And they
Right,
know it. And it's
right,
because it supports a business model
yeah,
is my theory of the only
you're
reason it
true,
continues. Because
100%.
if you can actually have somebody heal and they don't need to take a pill the rest of their life, well, that's a loss of profits,
It's a missed
big time,
opportunity right there.
right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and unfortunately, the entire Western medical system was really built around this business model, which is to kind of give you remedies that maybe make you feel better, but keep you coming back for more, and not really to fix the underlying issues. So
right,
it
right.
became incredibly frustrating, and continued to worsen my condition.
Huh.
Like, and I just kept getting worse and worse to the point my wife came home from a job interview. She found me completely naked.
Oh my
I'd
God.
shaved off my eyebrows for some reason. I'd shaved off all my hair in chunks, shaved off my facial hair, and all I had on was a black plastic garbage bag tied around my neck like a cape because I thought I was like a superhero and I was going to go out into the snowy Michigan weather and fight crime like Batman or something, naked Batman.
Why
So
do you think
she,
it was getting worse? Why do you think you're getting worse?
I think because they just kept increasing the dosage of those medications, so the side effects were getting worse,
Uh-huh.
and I was not getting restful sleep this entire duration. Like
Hmm.
these things, like the Seroquel would knock me unconscious, but
Hmm.
I wasn't actually like getting restful sleep
Right.
in that state.
It's like
You know what I
blacking
mean?
out when you're like drunk or something like that,
Yeah, and taking that stuff every day, it was poisoning my body. I could
Mhm.
feel it physically, like I
Yes.
was losing like muscle definition. I was losing like my athletic abilities
Yeah.
drastically. I remember I was going out, like I'd still try to work out, and I wasn't really changing that, but it was like I'd go out and I could barely run a 12-minute mile.
Wow.
And like, and it felt like I was running around with a 100-pound pack on my back all the
Hmm.
time and just doing simple stuff. So it was like that stuff was just poisoning my body.
Right.
And it just continued to get worse. And it was actually when my wife found me with that freaking naked Batman costume going on, it was within a few days of going to the VA and having my dose of Seroquel
Oh my
increased
God.
from 300 milligrams a night up to 450 milligrams a night, which is like a freaking heroic dose of that crap. And so I don't think there's any, you know, it's not a coincidence that that drove me into the deepest psychoses I had been
That
in
makes
yet.
me so fucking upset to hear that because you are this is a microcosm of what's happening to millions of people, and it has been happening to millions of people, just going through not only the VA. I think we shit on the VA a lot, but this is everything. But
Yeah.
it just like 5 minutes of this conversation with you, I'm like, oh yeah, it's probably the pills that
Oh
are.
yeah.
I have I'm a medic, dude. Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a neurologist. How are all of these people who are supposed to be experts and supposed to be smart can't like just missing this?
They've been indoctrinated, man.
Yeah.
They've been indoctrinated by an industry that is largely funded by the pharmaceutical industry and has influence on their curriculum in medical school. And they've been taught how to be drug pushers, basically. And I think more and more of them are starting to wake up to that fact and take a different path, but it often involves disconnecting from anything that's supported by the insurance industry,
Mm-hmm.
and having to take a lot more risk in their business model by
Right.
only serving people who pay out of pocket. But there's a whole world of medicine that's available out there. It's just not in the mainstream. It's not at the VA. It's not covered by TRICARE or health insurance providers for the most part. And it's because that entire model, the pharmaceutical industry, the insurance industry, and the medical community is all kind of tied in together. And I don't think it's because the physicians are in any mean, they want to help.
Yeah.
They became physicians because they want to be able to
Right.
help people.
Right.
And I'm not saying they're malicious, but I think they've been put in and educated in a way that has kind of closed their eyes to the realities of what they're doing. And unfortunately that's all too common. And I think upwards of 90% of the people that are put on these psychotropic medications have adverse reactions. And it often just gets dismissed by the healthcare provider to keep pushing them because that's what
Right.
they're trained to do.
Right. Well, and
Um,
when you are one of these healthcare providers too, there's this, when you're guys like us, like I understand there's doctors and there's training and there's all these things, but like I'm pretty open to whatever. Like if you have a good idea, I don't really care who you are so much if the idea is good. But on some level, when you become, top of your field in an industry, you're like, I'm the guy, like I'm the one who knows, and if I need to
right,
learn something, that mountaintop is smaller and smaller of people who you can learn from, so there's probably an inherent sort of skepticism to like, wow, oh cool, oh did you hear it on a podcast, is that where, you know what I mean,
right,
like yeah, I
right,
spent 25 years in school and practicing this, but I'm sure Mr. Podcast, has the
right.
answer too,
Oh,
so
there's
there's
absolutely that
yeah,
arrogance is very alive.
yeah, yeah,
It's
right.
a kick on their ego to think how could there be a better? I know this better than anybody.
Right,
I've been
right.
studying it for years. I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, like to
Yeah,
show it.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but yeah, it ended up. My wife took me to the emergency room. Luckily, she's a trauma nurse, so she had dealt with
Oh,
people in
cool.
psychoses. But she took me in. I spent a couple nights just having an out of body experience in the emergency room, and then I was transferred down to Battle Creek VA inpatient psych facility. And as I came to in that place, man, I awoke into a legitimate nightmare. Like the treatment of American veterans in this facility, it still breaks my heart to know
Oh,
that there are
wow.
people stuck in this place, man. And
Tell me a little bit about that. Like,
it
what did you see that
you
was?
know there's I was initially in a psychosis and in and out of psychosis, but I started to become more and more lucid the longer I was there, and
Hmm.
I started to really see what was going on,
Mm.
and the realities of what they were doing. There's a policy if you're on one-to-one care like I was in psychoses, that they're required every 15 minutes to come into your room and shine a flashlight in your face to make sure you're safe and not hurting yourself. um, Now, one, in this facility, it's incredibly difficult to sleep to begin with because
Yeah.
there's all these other veterans that are crammed in there with you, having psychoses, running up and down the hallways at night, screaming. Everything is concrete walls and tile floors, fluorescent lighting. It's just
No
always
windows.
echoey,
Yeah.
and this white bright lights always blaring in on your room, and there's oftentimes other people in your room with you. It's just not a comforting place to sleep to begin with, and now you add on top of that, you actually start to fall asleep and they wake you up with a flashlight in your face and come into your room, like you can hear someone open your door and breathing, and you're already in a hyper alert state, with your nervous system being completely out of whack, so you're not sleeping. The food that they're feeding you is this ultra processed prison food. There's
Uh,
not real anything. Everything is like the margarine that they give you. It's not real butter. It's got like 30 plus ingredients. The food is just junk, and it's not nourishing. The water that comes out of the tap smells like it's coming out of a broken hot tub. And in order to make it semi palatable, they put this artificially colored, artificially flavored raspberry lemonade tea powder into it to make the sort of concoction that's probably even more toxic than whatever's in that tap water. So you're malnourished, you're not drinking healthy things. If you get to go outside once a week, you're pretty fortunate, sometimes less than that. And then when you do go outside, you're going into a concrete yard that's surrounded by high-rise brick buildings with metal fencing all around you. There's no connection to nature. There's no sunlight. Um, Now you take a military member and you put them through survival school, a perfectly capable, physically and mentally robust individual within a few days to a week of being in a prisoner of war situation with sleep deprivation, malnourishment, uh, restriction, treating you less than human. Well, these are all the exact same things, maybe unintentionally, that are being done at the
Fuck
VA
that, dude.
inpatient psych facility. You are literally treated in a way that is designed, in my mind, to break you. And maybe that's just being pessimistic, but
No, I don't.
what they do
I
have
was,
is they want to put you on pharmaceutical drugs. And
dude.
that's what they have plenty of.
There's
They'll give
no
you so
way.
many you don't even know what all you're on. Um,
There is no way that a health professional of any stripe can see that situation. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I was in internal medicine. I got sick in 2023. I had sepsis. Actually, it was so random, but doesn't matter. I was in the hospital for 4 days, and everything that you were describing. I mean, like, dude, it was the worst experience of my life. Throw me back in the ocean, put me back into buds, put me back into recon school. I'll do that all fucking day. 4 days. That's it. I'm a total bitch, dude. I couldn't last more than 4 days. I was like, I'm seriously gonna escape this. Like, if you do
yeah.
not discharge me, you will never see me again. You know? And I had all those same thoughts. And I'm like, this has got to be intentional. There's no way this is unintentional. Like, I don't. I mean, I'm sure it is, and there's not going to be proof of the other.
Right.
But I'm like, it's so the opposite of what you should be doing, that it doesn't even pass like the first glance sniff test, dude. What about that would make
Yeah.
somebody better?
It's completely nuts, and it's all too common. It's not just this. I'm sure there's some of the VA
Sure.
inpatient facilities are maybe better. I bet there's probably some that are worse.
Yeah.
But it's also outside of the VA system. It's just the
Yeah.
mainstream mental health system is broken. And I found myself as a prisoner of the war on mental health that is taking place in our country. And
Wow.
it was nuts
Wow.
that just the people that were supposed to be trained in healthcare
Right.
somehow are so blind to the fundamentals of health. What do you
It's
need to recover? You need restful sleep. You
right.
need nutrition,
Nutrition,
that it's actually
sunlight.
providing nutrition to your body, not depleting your nutrients by eating it and processing it like all that processed crap. You need clean water, not stuff full of chlorine and fluoride and all the artificial colors and flavors that it came with there. You need outdoor exposure, sunlight, like exercise. There's none of that.
Yeah, and
There's
you don't need
actually,
medical school to know that.
and
You
there's a,
don't.
and there was a bizarre sort of, if you're familiar with the Stanford prison experiment,
Yeah.
basically that sort of dynamic was happening there where the staff members wore white lab coats, whether they were a nurse, a physician, or just a volunteer. And then we, as the I call them prisoners, but we were
Yeah.
the veteran patients. We wore prison scrubs, like the legit same scrubs that you see guys walking around in prison, and so there's a dynamic that kind of creates.
Of
Not with
course.
everybody. A lot of the staff was really good there, but there are
Sure.
also people there that were not well trained, that were there for the wrong reasons. And
Right.
when you're in a psychosis on and off, people have a way of treating you less than human and kind of
Mm-hmm.
assume that the person behind the eyes isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that all came to the point where I got very frustrated in the
Oh
facility and I
God.
planned an escape. I was using training from SEER school to like, let's help people get out of here. And a lot of the people are already just in full up zombie mode in the facility. But there were some of us that had, the mental whereabouts of being like, we are stuck in a fucking hell and we need to get out of here.
So you're stuck there. Like, you are not allowed to leave on some
I
level. You can't like check
I had
yourself out or
been,
anything.
and here's kind of a scary thing too, is I was voluntarily admitted to this
Oh
facility. I
God.
hadn't committed any crime. I was there on my own will because I
Right.
wanted to get help. And when
Right.
I saw it wasn't a helpful place, I begged to leave. I said, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't need to be here anymore. I will do better. I would rather go live in the woods than be in this facility
Yeah.
because it'll be a more healing environment.
Right.
And unfortunately they would not let me leave.
They wouldn't let
it
you
was
leave.
it was not my decision
It's like a
despite
catch
me
22
begging.
thing where it's like if you're too crazy to if you're not crazy enough to know that you want to leave, then you got to go back to fight. And it's, oh my god, dude, that is so unbelievably
But
frustrating. And
I planned to escape. Like I
yeah,
stockpiled warm clothing. I
yeah,
stockpiled snacks in my room.
hell
I
yeah,
was making weapons out of tube socks with
yeah,
balled up wet socks inside of it, and like showing other people there how to do the stuff.
hell yeah,
And
dude.
my plan was in the middle of the night I was going to pull the fire alarm, and when the fire alarm went off, we could make a run for it. Well, I
Mhm.
tried that plan, and I pulled the fire alarm, and I think somebody had already tried this before, and they didn't let
Oh,
any of us go
oh,
outside, and they brought in base police, and they figured out that I was the one that pulled it, and then I got forcibly injected with this stuff called Haldol, which should just be called hell. It basically felt like there were insects trying to crawl their way out from underneath my
dude, this
skin.
is an MK Ultra movie. Like, what
Dude,
the
all I
fuck?
wanted to do was rip my own skin off and run
Oh,
and scream up and down the hallways. And
why would they
eventually
inject you with that? What would even ostensibly be the point?
it's an antipsychotic, and they said I was doing
Yeah.
these erratic
Clearly, you'd
behaviors,
be
and I
psychotic if
must
you
be
want to get out of
psychotic.
here.
And I did have moments of being in psychoses in there, and but this was all the things I'm telling you now are things that were very real. This
Yeah.
isn't the stuff that I was
No, no.
experiencing. There's all sorts of crazy shit we can talk about that I experienced when I was in the psychoses, but this is the stuff that was absolutely very real. And well, anyways, I came to like maybe a day or two later from whatever they had all injected into my body at that point, and I was literally drooling on myself. I had become another one of these zombies,
Yeah.
just like, huh, where do you want me? And they ended up taking me into a room and sitting me down with this individual who was supposed to be my legal representation. She put a pen in my hand, put my arm up on the table with documents, and had me scribble. And I'm literally drooling on myself, no idea what's going on,
That's what I'm
scribbling
saying,
my
dude.
hand. And I ended up signing documentation that legally committed me to the facility, which they wouldn't let me leave anyways, but now I was actually legit committed, so I couldn't go. It stripped me of my Second Amendment right to bear arms. I'm no longer allowed to purchase or own a firearm.
Ever.
Um, no, ever. And I also, thanks, buddy. Um, I also, hey, can I have that, buddy? Leo, can I have that? Um, my books just showed up. Thanks,
Oh,
buddy.
sick.
There's the cover.
Phoenix Revival. Go buy this book, dude. I'm like, holy shit, dude. This is one of the crazy. I'm so glad I didn't know anything about this because I'm like on for the ride. I love it. I don't love it. Actually, I'm actually
It's a wild story,
I'm
right? I
very
mean,
upset, dude. I didn't think I was gonna be like upset from this conversation.
yeah,
I'm very upset actually. I think
um,
it's
yeah. I was,
how is that not how is that anything other than at a minimum criminal negligence,
yeah.
but probably something like psychological like torture.
It was legitimate torture. I mean, that's the same thing you would do to a prisoner of war to get
Yeah,
them to be compliant with whatever
yeah.
you want. Sleep deprive, malnourish, confine, treat less than
Sodium
human. Long
pentothal,
enough, you take a
juicy bro.
perfectly healthy guy going through survival training, and they're going to start having visual, auditory hallucinations and delusional thinking. That's a healthy person. Now
Right,
you take a person who's already trying to
right.
come out of a psychosis, dealing with
Oh my,
severe TBI and PTSD, and you do all the same things to them. It's, I mean, if it's not intentional, it's a level of incompetence that has seized our medical system that is truly deplorable and
that's
an embarrassment. And just I eventually, with the advocacy of my family, I think I ended up spending about 40 days in that facility. I ended up getting out with them. Luckily, my parents were both in the medical world.
oh
My
wow.
wife is a trauma nurse who had experience
Yeah.
dealing with people in psychoses, and they took me into custody after a battle with the people to
Yeah, so
get me
how'd they
out of there.
bust you out? Like what was that
I
process
think
like?
they had to just show that they could take care of me, and
So
that they
they
had
couldn't
the
even take
ability.
you out just like, hey, and well, let me pause for a second. Could you communicate with them like via phone or did they
Yeah,
come visit you or something?
eventually they were able to come and start visiting me regularly.
Now, can
which
you access the internet and stuff while you're in there?
there's one computer in the whole facility, and it often had a guy sitting on it that was completely out of his mind, and he was just on the slot machine, online slot machine thing he was doing all day. But once in a while, you could get on there and like get on the internet very briefly, but it was
Didn't have
few
your
and far
phone.
between.
Couldn't get on your
No, no
phone.
phone. Um, but they eventually advocated and got me out, largely
Oh
by
my.
showing that they could take care of me and wanted to take care of me. Um,
And so when they would come visit you, you would tell them, we'd be like,
oh
get
yeah,
me the fuck out of here. Like, please,
yeah,
they're killing me.
yeah. And I think at first they were kind of like, "There's no way it's this
Is
bad.
this
Like,
crazy?
is he
Yeah. That, are
psychotic?"
you in psychosis?
Um,
Is this a, yeah.
and I probably didn't help myself because I started to fuck with these people when I saw what was going on. Like, my body's covered in scars, and so I took like this dark green marker that's kind of like looks like rotten flesh, and I colored all of my scars, and then I was like running around pretending I was a zombie just to fuck with them because I was so pissed off that I was trying to keep my sanity, but that probably didn't help my case in the
Yeah.
in but at the time I was just like fuck these
Yeah. You
people.
got to do what you got to do,
um,
man. Right.
but they were eventually able to get me out. And when I got home, man, I was just broken. Like, I felt this deep sense of betrayal for the government that I had served. Like, how can you be treating veterans like this? I mean, here I am.
Oh, man.
I served my government in an honorable way. I, you know, I was just trying to get help, and here's what happens. And you know, I was miserable to be around. My system, and by the way, now I'm on even more meds. I'm still going to the VA, and the only answer is you just need more meds. And I was very fortunate. I had a friend that reached out to me that that started to turn me in the path of more holistic healing. And eventually I came across the book How to Change Your Mind by Michael
Yeah.
Pollan, which
Yeah.
is, for those that aren't familiar, it's the use of psychedelic-assisted therapy for dealing with, you know, things like I was dealing with. And I was able to find I started cleaning up my diet. I started learning more and more about the toxicity that's even in foods that seem kind of innocuous that should be healthy that are not anymore in our,
Mm.
I'd say probably 95+% of the food in a normal grocery store is got crap in it that's going to make you sick and fuck you up, from glyphosate to artificial colors and flavors and food additives. And there's this whole just laundry list of crap that's in our food. But I started to learn more about that world. I started to, get back on my exercise. I started to cut out things that I was starting to use to mask all this awful experiences that I was having, drinking more, using
Right.
cannabis more, things that weren't helping me necessarily. And I started to just get off of that stuff. And then I was fortunate really to find a local guide that took me on a psilocybin, into a psilocybin ceremony. And
That's
while that
incredible.
that
I
didn't
want
fix that,
that's what.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'm stumbling on my words. I want to ask you about that specifically, but before
Hmm.
we jump to that point, now this was your first sort of coming from like a hippie parent family kind of deal. Um, was there not really an emphasis or like sort of a knowledge that maybe these things could be used therapeutically, or what was yeah.
So in the back of my mind, when
Yeah.
I was 16, just sitting around a campfire with some friends, had a little crunchy handful of mushrooms,
Yeah.
and I was kind of dealing with, I don't know. I think I was largely just very disappointed in what society was going to look like as I grew older and older, and I wasn't really like, I was a bit depressed, really, you know. But after that night with those, crunchy mushrooms, I came to the next morning and just kind of had a renewed sense of hope in life. And I could
Huh.
feel the wind on my face and appreciate the colors of the
Right.
fall leaves changing. And like, I just felt alive again, which had that depression just faded, never came back. And it was like,
Wow.
I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't put it all together. But then after reading Michael Pollan's book, it kind of gave me confirmation like there's really something to this. Because I remember when I was,
Gotcha.
that did something to me that had a profound effect, a positive effect on my life.
Right. Right.
And so that was in the back of my mind for sure.
So now
Um,
you meet this guide that's
mhm.
going to take you through a psilocybin trip. Now I have one of my best friends I grew up with. Not to go into a lot of detail, but has dealt with some alcohol and depression, and some suicidal, whatever. And I have been encouraging, you know, exploring psychedelic therapy as an option, but I want, you know, I think, hey, you should go down to Peru and do an ayahuasca trip. You'd be like, yeah, sure, okay, maybe, but it's probably not going to happen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, what can we do in the intermediate time before, and psilocybin is just a little bit more accessible.
Oh yeah.
So how can you kind of walk me through what that therapeutic, like really approaching psilocybin from a therapeutic standpoint was like, and how you did it, and what you got out of it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean the first in that pursuit was finding someone to trust with it
Right.
because I mean you can go to the wrong person with the wrong set and setting with crap medicine, or you just go buy this stuff out on the street somewhere by somebody you don't know. It might have freaking fentanyl in it. Who knows these days? There's fentanyl in everything, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Um, so you
Right.
could absolutely get fucked up by doing this the wrong way. But I was fortunate to have reference through a friend who had been through the program and had high regards for this individual. And it was done with reverence. It was done in a ceremonial setting, and it was done by somebody who had a lot of experience with it. And while I think psilocybin's probably a safer option than in some of the psychedelics out there, I think you can probably still do some damage if you go into the situation unprepared or maybe on
Sure.
medications that can be interfering with that. So
Definitely.
I had, to the most part, I'd completely cut out alcohol, cannabis. I think at this point I had nearly weaned myself completely off most of the medications. I was still taking Seroquel at very low doses, but I skipped the dose prior to the ceremony,
Mhm.
so it wasn't in my system. Um, I went into the ceremony, spent the night with that medicine, and just sort of had this beautiful experience and this resetting of my nervous system
Mm.
from being in this constant state of fight or flight. I finally felt I had just
Mm.
switched back into parasympathetic mode for a minute and could breathe. And to use Michael Pollan's analogy, it was like a fresh snowfall over all these ruts of negative emotions and behaviors that had become who I was. And now, with this fresh snowfall covering those ruts, I could take a new path in my life. And one of the things that I came back from that ceremony with was the clarity that those pills they've been giving me is absolute insanity. Because the more of that stuff I've taken, the worse and worse I've continued to become. And the more I say I'm worse, the more of it they give me. And so I then was able to wean myself the rest of the way off Seroquel against the guidance of the
Mhm.
psychology and psychiatrist folks at the VA, even
Right.
against the guidance of my family. Were very worried. They were all from sort of a conventional medical background, and so they're like, no, you're supposed to do what the docs say. But I was like, this is not working. I'm not,
You
I
know what
mean,
question the docs really hate? If you ask them how many of the school shooters or mass shooters are actively being treated on some sort of
all of them.
antipsychotic, or yeah, they don't like that question.
I wonder
Now,
if there's a correlation to this.
yeah, yeah, no, don't no, don't think that. Um, Now, in terms of dosage, what were
Mhm.
you? Was this like a heroic dose, or were you kind of,
I think I did about 4 grams.
Okay,
I think
yeah,
I took three, and then I took one partway through the ceremony to boost
yeah,
it up a little bit. But it's about 3 or 4 grams, so
okay.
it wasn't a huge dose, kind of middle of the road. But it was enough to give me something coming out of it, and
And what
that
was the
gave me.
ceremony like aspect of that?
Um, so typically it's done with a group of people, but it was right in the heart of COVID.
Yeah,
But the guide was nice enough, even though everybody else had pulled out. I was like, I
yeah,
still want to
please.
do this. I'm not afraid of all this crap. Let's
Yeah.
move forward. And so it ended up just being me, the guide, and her significant other, and we just sat outside. She still had some sort of ceremony on it with, using sage to cleanse, and we had a fire, and there was a little bit of sort of ceremonial input at the
Hmm.
beginning, and
Some
but then largely,
intentionality,
oh
right?
yeah, like setting intentions, all of that. But during it was largely just being with nature and being
Hmm.
with my thoughts. And
Mm.
the guide could come up to me and kind of sense when I was really tight and like teaching me some breathing to kind of let go and open up. And
Mm.
like, it's okay to look around. Like I was just so like, just like in my own little bubble. But she was able to kind of push and push at the right moments and allow me to open up into the experience that much more. And by the end of the night, we were sitting around the campfire. They were playing a guitar, singing, and it was just this beautiful, like, wonderful experience. There was thunderstorms in the air all around us that were supposed to have hit us, but we never even got a single drop of water. It was just lightning and
Wow.
everything out in the distance, and it was beautiful. But it was like there was this little protective bubble around us that protected us through the night. But yeah, I came out of that with, this sort of change of mindset, and I continued uh, to continue with the holistic stuff, with eating better, cutting the toxicity out of my life. And then eventually I was able to get off of the Seroquel completely. I still wasn't sleeping very well. I ended up looking up Veteran Solutions, which is
Yeah.
psychedelic treatment through Marcus and Amber Capone.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
applied to their program. I didn't really meet the requirements, as you're
Hmm.
supposed to be, I think, two-time combat deployed, special forces background. I was neither of those. So I applied anyways. I didn't get in, but they put me in touch with another organization that's since ceased to exist, but it was called Warrior Angels Foundation. And they were putting together a fundraiser for this David Goggins ultra run. It was a 4x4x48 challenge. So you ran 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight.
It sounds very
And they
Goggins.
they were yeah, they were taking veterans down to their ranch in Texas, and they were going to have this whole event. And so I was like, well, that sounds cool. And there was kind of this calling to me, like, you should try to help out with this. So
Yeah.
I had never talked publicly about any of this up to that point. I thought I was a complete failure, that nobody cared about me. I was in a very dark place still, but something was telling me, you need to share a little of this story, and maybe there's other people like you out there. And I didn't have any social media even at that point. I'd like cut myself off from the world, which is so common with that kind of stuff going on. But I ended up texting it out to a few people I knew and sending it out in emails, this fundraiser page. And it just had a little brief synopsis of some of what I've been telling you about. And within a week, I had raised almost $10,000. There
Wow.
was an outpouring of support. And the guys who ran it, Adam and Andrew Marr, called me like, hey, you want to come down to Texas? We're getting you a ticket. And next thing I know, I show up in Texas, and I was welcomed into this community of other veterans who had had almost the exact same experience that I had. We had been these high performing military dudes. There was MARSOC guys, there were Marines, there were SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets, all these diverse high speed jobs. We'd been injured in the service, and then we had to deal with PTSD diagnoses. And all of us had the same story of, we had gotten these pills, and then we found ourselves with our lives falling apart around us and getting worse. But we all came together, and that was the first day where I finally had a little bit of hope again,
Wow.
like, I'm on the right path. It was
Yeah.
very affirming, like,
Oh.
those docs are wrong, I am right. I'm not crazy to think that this might help. And over the course of this run, I got to talk to all these different dudes and women that were there, and realize, like, we have so much in common. I can't believe this is so commonplace, and
Right.
nobody knows about it.
Right. Right.
And late into the second night of running, we had like 30 plus miles on our legs, and a Native American group was running the ceremony for the event. They invited us in to their teepee for a peyote ceremony,
Oh
and
wow.
so had this sort of peyote ceremony tied into the experience, and that was
Oh
just
wow.
absolutely
That's wild.
beautiful. And at the end of the event, we had completed 48 miles of running. There's just this big circle of freaking big tattooed burly badass dudes just crying their eyes out, and the Native American elder invited us all to go place our intentions with this elder tree that was in the middle of the field. And as the crowd kind of cleared out, I walked up to it, and as I placed my forehead against that tree, I felt this shockwave of
Dude.
white energy just blast through my body. And I didn't have to think anything or say anything. Whatever that force was knew exactly who I was. And it reinvigorated me with a purpose. It was like, you are here for a reason. You've gone through that because you could endure it, and you need to share your story, because
Right.
there's others like you stuck in that dark place that you
Mhm.
were, uh, and you need to help them guide out of it. And I was in tears, just like, this is all makes sense. Like, this was all for a reason. Um,
Dude, that's crazy. I would tell you three things. First of all, I think at least 50%. So we everyone's acknowledging psychedelics are real medicine. They can absolutely fix your brain and fix your life and blah blah
Oh
blah.
yeah,
Okay, I think that's 50% of it. I think the other 50% of it is the that connection, the fact that you're finding other people. You're not alone, dude. And
right.
your story is it is a story that we're all everyone feels like they're alone, and then they see that they're not alone, and they have a shoulder to like lean on. They got someone to their left and right, and I think that in itself is empowering and a form of medicine. That kind of goes hand in hand with the actual medicine. And then the other thing I wanted to say that was interesting when you said you put your head on that tree. So I went to Israel a few years ago, and it was my first time going to Israel. I'm Jewish, but I didn't really grow up Jewish. Like I didn't, it's not really like I just like by blood am that. But over at the Wailing Wall, separate it men and women, and you go and you write down a little prayer and you roll it up in on a piece of paper, and then you go and you stick it in one of the cracks of the wall. So I'm up there. I write my little prayer down, and I'm kind of just like taking everything in. It's really crazy. And there's a lot of like very like Hasidic Orthodox people. I mean, guys that are like dirty, like they don't change their clothes, they don't wash, like they look like homeless people. And they just go to the wall and pray. That's what they do, and it's trippy. You're like, wow, this is like what a crazy kind of thing. I'm kind of taking pictures, being respectful, but like I'm not in the moment. I'm like observing the moment, and then I'm about to kind of walk away, and I'm like, hey, let me just do my little prayer thing, whatever. And I go up to the wall, and same thing that you just described, dude. I swear to God, it was like electricity started coming through me. I felt vibration and like buzz in my teeth and lips. And then I started getting this like almost like a constriction in like my chest. And then the wailing, well, dude, I thought started wailing. Like immediately I was like bawling my fucking eyes out over nothing. My prayer wasn't even like a sad thing. It was like a fairly generic, but there that energy, that source of like energy is a very real thing, and when you can tap into it in different ways in different places, it extends across cultures, it extends across all religions, all sorts. But it's very real that whatever you felt right there, I've felt it myself.
Yeah, yeah, it was absolutely, and it's one of those things you just have to experience in order
Right.
to know that it's real. At that point, I don't think I would have believed it if someone's like, "Oh, I just went and put my head on this tree, and now I've been connected with divinity and the universe again."
Wow.
Like, um, yeah, but once you experience, it's like it's undeniable, and it's beyond like having a faith in something. It's experiencing
Yeah, it's
it
experience.
firsthand, and
Right.
but yeah, that put me in touch
No.
with an entire network of just healing modalities and opportunities through nonprofit organizations that help me gain access to a wide variety of modalities that are just off the beaten path,
Right.
but were incredibly effective despite the severity of my case,
Right.
at giving me my life back.
Right. That's incredible. Now, this is kind of a in the weeds question, but experientially, how was the peyote different from the psilocybin?
I found the peyote incredibly like sensory enhancing. I was even while I was on, I was like, man, this stuff would be incredible if you could have a small dose of this and then do night ops at the boat or
Mm.
like special forces guys because
Hmm.
it's very energizing. And
Hmm.
while I was running legs of this run in the middle of the night after the ceremony, and I remember like I turned off my head, like something told me to turn off my headlamp. And it was so black, like at first I couldn't see, but as my eyes adjusted, it was like, and I
Oh
just had like
wow.
super night vision. I could see the skyline and the stars, and I just felt physically also way better. It was so energizing. Like I was struggling, I was sore, and from the point of that peyote ceremony, I just started running faster and faster to the point where
Oh
the
my.
last 4 mile leg, I was at like a dead sprint and finished over the finish line. I wasn't breathing hard. I didn't feel fatigued. I felt
Huh.
like I could go do it again. It was like very invigorating.
That's really interesting. Was there a purge like associated with it?
No,
Not
I
as
didn't have I
memorial.
didn't have a nausea or a purge or anything like
Yeah,
that.
because sometimes even with mushrooms, that I've felt that before, and I've get sometimes I call it the sits, but it's like sometimes we take like mushroom doses and you just kind of want to like melt into whatever like the thing is that you're
Yeah, it
sitting
was it
on.
wasn't
It was like
anything
the
like that.
opposite
It was, yeah, it
almost.
was very uplifting and
Interesting.
And just that being in that ceremonial space with these Native Americans and the
Yeah.
healing that was going on between the military community and the
Yeah.
natives that was happening was just like
That's so
there was
cool.
something incredibly special happening that day, and I felt it. You know,
Mm.
we became these torchbearers of hope for
Yeah.
going forward in our society and helping to lead others. And I'm so grateful for podcasts like you that are
Yeah. Well, thank you.
sharing these stories, man, because I know generations of warriors behind us, they
Yeah.
didn't have that. They just got whatever was on the mainstream news, and none of this was being talked about. And we are so lucky that we live in a time where the freedom of speech has been preserved, you know,
Yeah.
despite all the recent battles to keep it so. But the word is getting out, and there's an incredible evolution occurring right now. You know, it's not in the news, it's not being talked about, but there is something happening right now in our
It's we're
society.
pulling the power back to the people,
Yeah.
and that's a very like trite, kind of expression. But if you think about it, like that is what's happening. It's the information elite was, the media, and you had to go filter everything through this one, channel before it could get disseminated out, and then that was gospel and medicines, the medical elite. This is how you
Right.
heal your thing. Here, this is what we know about those savages back, in the day, and how backwards they were.
Right.
Dude, we're pulling all that back. We're taking the narrative, and we are finding that everyone has a story to say. I mean, I kind of got into podcasting on the same, but I was coming on as a guest, and I'm like it was therapeutic talking through my story and figuring out like why do I still have this emotional baggage associated with my injury and my military career, and why do I feel ashamed on some level of I should be fucking through the over the moon proud of everything that I've accomplished, and I don't know the answer to that, but talking through stuff and connecting with other people like you has been part of my healing journey as well.
Absolutely, man. And people are reconnecting, and they're finding this shared, whatever you want to call it, divinity, love, and it's causing this massive awakening, it feels like.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
very exciting time to be alive with it all.
So where does your story go from there?
You know, I guess if you want to read the book, there's a
Yeah.
lot more to all of this
Sick.
really in greater detail. But you know, I made a massive transformation. You know, there's a lot of challenges with rebuilding a family after going through all of that, rebuilding a career, rebuilding my health. Yeah, buddy. Pretty soon, buddy. Like 10 minutes. Like over 2 hours. I'll be up soon, buddy. I'm
We'll
getting
wrap up
recruited to go
soon.
read some bedtime books here pretty soon.
Dude, I totally respect that. Well, you want to just we can wrap up. You want to just tell people maybe where to find you, how to reach you, what you're doing now, and
That'd
we'll
be
just
awesome,
a
man.
nice
Yeah.
little note to end on.
Yeah. You can find me online. I have a website. It's just kegangill.com. You spell that KEGANGILL.com. You can find links to all my social media in there. I'm on Instagram at Kegan Smurf Gill. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm a motivational speaker now, so if you're ever in need of a motivational speaker, I've spoken at everything from nonprofit fundraisers, universities, mastermind retreats, corporate events, universities, high school commencement ceremonies, and a little bit everything in
For
between,
you.
from very intimate settings to massive auditoriums full of people. So, anybody who needs a speaker, I'd love to come talk to your audience and help inspire them. Um,
That's
I'm trying to
incredible,
think.
man.
Yeah, my book, Phoenix Revival, it's coming out January 21st. It's going to be on, you can get it right on Amazon. It'll be hardcover, paperback, ebook, and you can get it on Audible. But that's going to be dropping soon. If you get in and pre order a copy, that helps it boost it up on Amazon. And if you do decide to read it, please leave me a review to help get this thing visibility. I've come to learn that the publishing world is a freaking racket with, you know,
Yeah,
everything from the New York Times bestseller list, TED Talks, book awards. It's all just how much money you want to pay to get it.
that's so funny.
It's not meritoriously based in any way. It's just give us money and we'll put you on there. So help me do this the organic way. and
Love it.
spread it word of mouth. But that's it. Phoenix
Phoenix
Revival.
Revival. And are you on Instagram or any
Yeah,
socials?
yeah. I'm on Instagram at Kegan Smurf Gill, and I'm on LinkedIn just under Kegan Gill. So you can find me on both of those platforms as well.
Give him a follow, guys. Check out his stuff. Pick up his book. This is an incredible dude. This is literally one of the best podcast episodes I've
Kick
been
ass.
on. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me,
And
Jordan.
I'll be sending you a bag of copies, so I'll get your info after. But just for everybody else, this Mind Body
Oh,
Mushroom is
nice.
brought to you by Windansea Coffee. We make
Nice.
adaptogen infused coffee and coffee products. We do CBD infused. We do mushroom infused. We have matcha, all sorts of. So it's all functional stuff, not psychedelic. I know we talked about psychedelics, um, but yeah, this is all legal. You can order it. You're not going to pop on a drug test, anything like that. But anyway, that's the sponsor for the show. And Kegan, dude, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. And better get back to that bedtime story there soon.
Yeah.
You're being beckoned.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me, Jordan. Great to meet you.
Yeah, man. You as well. All right. Peace, man. Holy